In this lesson, we'll cover how to cut your designs and some of the useful features that are available to you. Some of these being how to set a weed border, the tile pattern, the number of copies, and how to assign conditions to different colors in your design. Let's review the steps and settings for cutting a design. The first couple of steps are configuring options such as the weed border and tiling. After these are configured, the next step is to click on the Cutter's tool icon in the side panel. This is where the final cutter settings can be adjusted, such as the cutting condition for the intended cutter and material. The final step sends the job to the cutter. To set the weed border and line, click on the Weed Border tool icon. This will open the weed border options in the side panel. In this panel, the weed border can be enabled by clicking the checkbox Show Weed Border. The next setting below determines the distance between the design and the weed border. Weed borders become a part of the job until they are disabled. This means that even if the job design is moved, the weed border will move with it. The next cutting tool icon is Tiling. Clicking on this icon displays all the tiling options in the side panel. Tiling is an operation that is necessary if you plan to cut a job that is larger than the cutter you are using. For instance, if your job is 30 inches in height by 120 inches in length, and your cutter is only 24 inches, such as is the case with the CE 6060, the job will have to be split into two sections or tiles. When a design is tiled, each tile will be sent separately. In other words, each tile will be cut individually. Here, the job design shows that there is only one tile assigned to it. This is because the design size will fit within the cut area of our cutter. The options in the side panel allow you to configure the tile pattern. But first, let's resize this job design so that it is larger than the media page size. This is achieved by simply disabling the tile pattern by clicking Show Tiling, and click on the Scaling tool icon. Make the design the height of 35 inches. Now let's switch to the tiling options again by clicking the Tiling tool icon. Notice that we now have a box with a blue overlay and with a single line in the middle. The single line is where the job design will be split for tiling. Thus, the design is split into two tiles. Notice that there is also a number for each tile, identifying tile 1 and 2. The edge of the tile pattern shows the dimensions of the tiles. Note that the bottom tile is limited to the width of the cutter. Let's quickly switch back to the media page options. Here is where we can see how this design will actually be tiled. Let's switch back again to the tile settings by clicking on the Tiling tool icon. Observe that there are 4 white grab handles on each corner of the tile pattern. This allows for the tiling pattern to be adjusted visually. In the top right corner is a moving handle in case the tile pattern has to be repositioned manually. The red grab handles are used to adjust the tiles within the pattern. For instance, we can adjust the tile so that the tile doesn't split the middle of an object. Here we can raise the line just a hair to make the split occur between the objects. Tile lines can also be added to the tile pattern. Sometimes this is needed for a job design that requires smaller tiles for better handling when mounting the graphic onto the substrate. To add tile lines, hover the mouse point over a tile line or tile border, click and drag the mouse, and a new line starts to form. This line can then be dragged to a tile line in the middle, or it can be dragged to the opposite outside tile border, or any tile line in between if there are any. Besides manual repositioning, the tile pattern can be repositioned by using the values in the side panel. This is also true with adjusting the size of the tile pattern. Both the width and the height can be adjusted using these values here. Maintain aspect ratio affects the height and width values by keeping the tile pattern proportionate. The next section, Configure a Regular Grid, has settings to determine how the pattern will be set. Automatic has Graphtec Studio set the tile placement automatically. If we click this now, it will reset the tiling to what the software thinks is the best pattern for the design. If you think otherwise, there is Custom. This is when the tiles are set according to our choice. This setting is automatically chosen when the tiles are adjusted visually as we did earlier. Regular Grid will set the tiles evenly across the tile pattern. This setting allows us to set the number of rows and columns to the pattern. Thus, when this option is enabled, relative values will appear below for setting the cell's width, cell's height, number of columns, and the number of rows. The bottom 4 settings determine how the overlaps will be configured. By overlapping the tiles onto the adjoining tiles, you can eliminate any gaps between the tiles when assembling the panels after they have been cut. You'll know that an overlap is applied when you see these transparent red bars that overlay the tile lines in the preview window. The symmetrical checkbox at the bottom of the overlap section will keep the values symmetrical. The top and bottom overlaps are kept the same size, as well as the left and right overlaps. For instance, if the bottom overlap value is changed to 1 inch, the top value will be set to 1 inch. The same would be true for the left and right overlaps. As one is changed, so is the other. The Show Dimension checkbox, when checked, will show or remove the dimensions along the edge of each panel. There will be times when you may want to cut an individual tile. To cut just one tile or selected tiles, you must disable the other tiles. Disabling a tile is achieved by just clicking on it. This will disable the tile by removing the transparent blue overlay. As an example, we've created a tile pattern that has 3 tiles. If we just wanted to cut tile number 1 and 3, we would click on tile 2. This will disable tile 2, leaving tiles 1 and 3 enabled. We'll be covering this later in the lesson, but if we were to switch to Configure Cut Job tool icon and click on Configure Tiling, we are given the choice of cutting all tiles or selected tiles only. If all tiles is selected, it will cut all the tiles, whether they are disabled or not. In this case, we'll want to choose Selected Tiles Only. Notice the box next to it that only tile 1 and 3 are shown to be cut. Also notice that only tiles 1 and 3 are shown in the preview area. So if you choose to enable and disable certain tiles, make sure you choose Selected Tiles Only prior to cutting in the Configure Cut Job options. Recall that the preview area has 2 modes, the drawing mode and the cutting mode. When we click on one of these 4 tool icons, the preview area will automatically switch to the cutting mode. The reason for this is that these tool icons have all the settings for cutting. As mentioned in other lessons, the cutting mode will set the media page so that it becomes a representation of the media to be cut. Here it will show the orientation of the job design and how it lays out on the media being used for cutting the design. The media page size can be adjusted by clicking on the media page tool icon. This will open the media page options in the side panel. You notice that it has settings for adjusting not only the media page size, but the job size, placement, and orientation as well. This mode is helpful to see how the job design will lay out on the media before it is actually cut. The media page size automatically sets to the cut area of the default cutter. The size can be adjusted by using the width and height values in the side panel. The sliders are for sizing the media visually, whereas size values next to the sliders allow for more accurate sizing. Once the width and height have been set, the media page in the cutting preview window will adjust accordingly. Just below the sliders are the preset media page sizes. The choices range from pulled sizes gathered from the connected cutter to commonly used or standard sizes that were installed with the software. To view all of the media page size presets, click on the pull-down list and then use the scroll bar to pan down the list. At the top of the media type list are 3 media sizes for each cutter connected to the computer. These sizes are obtained from the cutter during syncing. Automatic will set the media page size to the current cut area of the cutter. It will automatically change the media page size as the cut area is changed with the cutter. This will only display for the default cutter. You'll notice that the word pole size is used with some choices. Graphtec Studio constantly queries or polls the default cutter to gather information about the cutter. One of the items during this syncing process is the dimension of the cut area of the cutter. This does not necessarily refer to the width or size of the loaded material, but can be the actual cut area. For instance, 24-inch material may have the cut area of 23.5 inches, depending on where the outside wheels of the cutter are located. The next choice will set the media page size to the current cut area of the cutter, but will not automatically check it. The next choice will set the media page size to the maximum cut area limit of the cutter. There are other presets as well. If we scroll down the list, we are given more preset choices that are considered standard sizes, such as 8.5 by 11. Keep in mind that anytime the height or width of the media page is adjusted, it will automatically select Custom. Just below the media size are the settings for the job size. These allow for the job design to be resized to best fit within the media page limits. Below the job size is where the origin of the job design will be placed. This is where position presets or actual coordinates can be entered. The last 2 settings will rotate the job to one of the 4 axis angles of 0, 90, 180, and 270. Mirroring will flip the design horizontally or vertically. Next, we will discuss using the matrix copies function. You may be wondering what the difference is between the matrix copies and replicate that we discussed in the lesson on advanced editing. The difference between the 2 functions is this. Replicate will copy elements of the design, whereas matrix copies will make copies of the complete design. Matrix copies is used when the design is completely finished and now you'd like to make copies of the design. To make copies of the job design, click on the Matrix Copies button. The side panel will display with the options for making copies in a matrix format. Rows sets the number of rows in the matrix. As the rows value is increased, the copies are added in an upward direction. Column sets the number of columns in the matrix. As the columns value is increased, the copies are made in a horizontal direction. Setting the limit to media will limit the number of copies to the media page area and prevent copies from being made beyond the media width or height. Separation is helpful when needing to either spread the copies or compact the copies. Horizontal is the distance or spacing between each copy horizontally. Vertical is the distance or spacing between each copy vertically. The Configure Cut Job panel has 4 useful configuration settings in one panel. The configuration headings are Apply Conditions, Configure Tiling, Advanced, and Copies. To access a configuration setting, click on the heading. This will reveal the settings for that configuration heading. In this section, Apply Condition, you can determine what you'd like to cut and how it will be cut. These 2 choices determine what is to be cut. All will cut all the graphic lines in the job. By color will allow you to determine which colors of a job design are to be cut. For instance, here we have a job design that has 2 colors, red and blue. We can have only the red objects cut, the blue objects cut, or have both colors cut. This is handy when using different color vinyls to produce a job design. Take note that by color filters by line color and not fill color. you'll notice that whatever choice is made, it will allow conditions or media types to be used when cutting the different elements. For instance, if we chose to cut all, we can then assign a condition or media type by clicking here. This list will show the 8 conditions. In other words, if we assign condition 2, the software would signal the cutter to switch to condition 2 prior to cutting. When cutting a design requiring different medias, in all likelihood you would want to pause the cutter prior to cutting the next color. To place a pause between colors, right-click on this area here, and this menu pops up where we can select Pause. Once selected, it will show this little pause prior to cutting the next color. Media types can also be assigned to the cutting operation. Once a media type is assigned to the cutting, then the software, prior to cutting the design, will switch to an auxiliary condition and change the settings to what are set in the media type. This can be a powerful function when working with colors. For instance, when cutting by color, a condition or media type can be assigned to each color. This may be helpful when having 2 different types of material that need alternate settings. Some have used this feature for the print and cut process by assigning one cut line color for cutting through the first layer and assigning the second color to a condition for cutting somewhat further into the liner sheet for pop-out decals. The next section, Configure Tiling, we briefly discussed in the earlier part of this lesson. Here is where you can choose whether you want to cut all the tiles or cut just the enabled tiles when the tile pattern was being created. For instance, here is a job that was split into 3 tiles. Earlier we disabled tile number 2 so that only tiles 1 and 3 would cut. Notice that under the selected tiles only, it defaults to tiles 1 and 3. But let's say that we really only need to cut tile 1. We can fix this by changing the number in the box to 1. And now it will only cut tile 1 as shown in the preview area. Finally, the separation value determines the distance between tiles when they are cut. The Advanced section has settings to determine the action to take after a layer, a tile, or a job is completed. In the After Cutting a Layer settings, Continue Immediately will continue to send the job to the cutter without pausing, regardless of whether the cutter is still busy cutting. Await Cutter Ready will delay sending the job to the cutter until the cutter is ready to accept it. It will resume sending the job once the cutter is back to ready mode. In the After Cutting a Tile setting, the same options appear along with the added option to pause. When selecting Pause, a message will appear that allows you to decide when to resume cutting. In After Cutting a Job, the option to Return to Origin, on the other hand, will return the cutter back to its origin point. This setting is usually best used when cutting sheet media. Feed will feed the job beyond the back edge of the job design after it is cut, and then reset the origin. This setting is useful if you plan to cut different jobs sequentially. Additional Advance, when greater than 0, will advance the media to the end of the job design after it is cut, and then advance it yet more according to the desired distance in this setting. Send Cut Job Uninterrupted will send all the data to the cutter at once without pausing or stopping. Auto Weld will weld any overlapping shapes in the design. Convert Strokes to Outlines will have the cutter cut around the edge of the paths or strokes thickness, rather than cutting along the center of the paths. The last section, Copies, sets the number of copies to be cut in the job design. The Cutter Options button will show both the status and settings for the connected cutter. If there is more than one cutter connected to your computer at the same time, Graphtec Studio will recognize each one. In fact, this is a good test to see if a Graphtec cutter is connected and communicating with the computer, because if a cutter is not showing in this panel, this will indicate that the cutter is either not connected or is not turned on. Each connected cutter will have a picture of the connected cutter, the model name, the status of the cutter, along with several groups of settings. In this case, we are only using the CE6000, so that is the only cutter currently displayed. The status is displayed just below the model name. The more common status modes are syncing, which indicates Graphtec Studio is gathering information from the cutter. Pause indicates the cutter is in pause mode. Ready indicates the cutter is in ready mode and is ready to accept cutting data from Graphtec Studio. Cutting indicates the cutter is cutting a job. Just below the cutter image is where you can choose the condition number for cutting the current job. For example, when the status is in ready mode, the cutters that are connected will each display 4 groups of settings: Condition, Tool Settings, Advanced, and Test Cut. Condition shows the current settings of the selected condition on the cutter. When clicking on one of the conditions above, Graphtec Studio receives the condition settings for that condition from the cutter. Tool Setting displays the other advanced settings for the cutter that relate to the tool. Advanced will display advanced settings unrelated to the tool, such as language and length units. Most of these settings are complex, so it is best to review your cutting manual for explanations of each of these settings. Test Cut will perform a test cut. This allows you to test the condition after it has been adjusted. Graphtec Studio allows control over the conditions on the cutter. Conditions are a group of basic settings for the current condition found on the cutter. Unless the colors are assigned to a different condition or media type, Graphtec Studio will use these settings when cutting the job. Most of the settings are standard, with the exception of 2 added settings. Cut Line Pattern determines the type of line to be cut, from solid to different types of dashed lines. Passes, which determines how many passes each cut line will make. Using passes can be helpful when cutting harder or thicker materials where more than one cut pass is needed with the cutting tool. Below the condition settings are the advanced settings. The last setting under advanced enables the auto pre-feed. Once it is enabled, the length of the pre-feed will be displayed and can be set. Recall that this function helps keep the media tracking for longer lengths by establishing and following embedded tracks. Earlier we discussed how each color can be assigned to either a condition or media type. What we will do now is review how to set up media types within Graphtec Studio. Media types are a group of settings that are reflected within a cutter condition. The only difference is that they can be labeled, assigned a name. To define media types, click on the Cutter pull-down menu and select Define Conditions. This will open the side panel to 2 folders. The second folder contains media types. Click on it and it will reveal the different media types that came with Graphtec Studio. To edit one of these media types, hover the mouse over the media type and a small edit link appears just to the right. Click on Edit and the side panel displays all the settings for that media type. Notice that the settings are exactly what are included with a typical condition. From here we can start making changes such as blade type, offset, speed, acceleration, and force. There are advanced condition settings such as tangential emulation and even establishing the number of cut passes. Let's get back to the media type list by clicking on the All Conditions link and create a new media type. This could be for a specific media type that you'd like to label the manufacturer and type. This is done by right-clicking on the list and a context menu appears. The third choice is Add Material. Click on it and a new entry is added with the label Material. Material is highlighted, meaning that we can rename it immediately. Let's enter Oracal 951 Premium Cast. Now that we have a new media type, let's configure it according to the type of media for which it's intended. Similar to earlier steps, hover the mouse over the media type and click on Edit. From previous tests, we can keep the blade type to the CB09U. The speed is a little too high, so let's reduce it to about 30. The acceleration we can increase to about 4. and the cut force we will set to around 15. The other settings will keep the same. Now we can click on the All Conditions link to return us to the list. Keep in mind that a media type is not limited to configuring just a particular media, but it can also be configured for a type of cutting. For instance, let's create a media type for cutting smaller characters on outdoor vinyl. Once again, we can right-click on the list and select Add Material. We'll name it Intricate Cutting Outdoor. The purpose would be to use this media type with settings for cutting intricate graphics and lettering. Now hover the mouse over the new media and click Edit. We can keep the blade type to the CB09U. The speed will reduce to a slower speed of 20. Acceleration we will leave at 1, and the cut force we will set to 14. Let's get back to the media type list by clicking the All Conditions link. There will come a point when you've created a multitude of media types and would like to organize them into folders, such as you see here in the side panel. The idea is to organize your media types. You may want to organize them into preset folders by the manufacturer, type, or some other method. To create a folder, right-click on the list again, and this time, click on the second choice, Add Preset. Preset is just another word for folder. In this case, we will just name our preset My Media. Now we can start dragging our newly created media types into the My Media preset folder. We can go back to the Configure Cut Job options, and under Apply Conditions, we can assign the cut lines to our new media types. We can access newly added media that are also organized by the preset folders.